Welcome to Now More Questions, the interview series on European affairs that gets conversation started. In this episode, we'll be talking about the European Chips Act that was announced by the European Commission on the 8th of February 2022, this year, promising digital sovereignty for Europe and establishing an investment plan to increase Europe's manufacturing capacity of semiconductors. So what's at stake here, and why has this become a European priority? To discuss this, I am joined by Ben van der Zon, Chair of the Silicon Europe Alliance. Ben has over 30 years of experience working in high-tech and complex systems. He held various research and development management positions in the defense sector, the semiconductor industry, and in government. So no doubt, Ben will help us navigate through the complexities of the chip. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for your kind introduction.
Thanks a lot for being with us. And maybe just to give our audience a feel for where you're coming from, can you tell us about the Silicon Europe Alliance and what it represents?
Yes, with all the pleasure. The Silicon Europe Alliance is the result of a European-funded project which started in 2012, where the Commission decided that cluster organizations should work more together. For the semiconductor and digital technologies sector, four clusters joined forces and did a very successful project, and it was so successful that we decided to continue to work together as cluster organizations. Just for your understanding, a cluster organization is an association with and for industry, knowledge institutes, universities, and also government bodies, just as a sort trade organization. With the Silicon Europe Association, now we cover 10 regions or 10 countries on digital technologies, and it is an initiative that is spontaneous, continuing, and building this interaction between all the players in the digital technologies. So we have access to more than 3,000 companies and organizations. That's in a bird's eye view what Silicon Europe is. And of course, Silicon Europe is very much is happy with the fact that the European way of working is more and more supporting these collaborations, which gives us a lot of opportunities to bring forward our talents.
The technologies that are part of your clusters are now high on the priority list of the European Commission, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss that. First, we'll start with our question chain. It's our tradition in Now More Questions that the first question comes from the previous guest. So we'll be hearing from that now.
My question to my colleague in this respect is that what is the answer from this sector European industry to ensure our competitiveness, especially vis-a-vis our Asian colleagues, Asian competitors? This is an important question also for us because we are aiming at smart farming, digital agenda, and new precision farming tools. We need those chips. We need those chips in a competitive market, and we preferably would like to see European strong presence. Perhaps it's not realistic to say that we should dominate the market, but we need to have dynamic market where we have some European supplies. How can we ensure this?
Yeah, that is. Thank you for this question. It's a clear question, and I think this question is the theme that will go throughout this discussion that we will have. in short, what we are facing at this moment is that because of the worldwide chip shortages, production of goods in Europe is lagging behind. Cars cannot be delivered in time, etc., etc. So it is from that perspective, it's important that Europe is taking on this chip production very very seriously, and that will also, I just mentioned automotive industry, but it will also support the agro business. There's a lot of let's say technology and smart things. And smart things always means that there's a lot of electronics and a lot of software involved. Will be needed. So make sure that it can be made in Europe. So we don't have to ask the Asians to change their production schemes in order to support us.
So the European Commission is talking about investing 43 billion euros in the production of chips in Europe, but you mentioned that they're very important in terms of software and many applications, but actually, what exactly are we talking about? What is a chip, and why is it such a strategic asset that we need to have it manufactured in the European Union?
Yeah, what is it? What is a chip? Basically, it's just a tiny piece of silicon which has undergone 40, 50 production steps, and at the end, a chip can be either a memory, a very large memory, or it can be a calculator that can make all kinds of difficult analysis. For instance, for artificial intelligence, you need to compare a lot of data and make your decisions based on that. A chip, certainly the most advanced chips that are now designed, can do that. So that the chip is in the heart of many systems. If you take a collaborative robot, it has a lot of cameras and decision-making systems. It's all powered with chips that do a lot of calculations based on what it sees and what it feels, and make sure that collaborative robot does what it is supposed to do. If you are dependent for these most important and vital things in all the systems, then you have a very backward position. Cars do have something like 100 to 200 smart systems on board, radars, sensors, and whatever. And without them, they would not be able to drive. So
it's a massively strategic asset for European industry and many product applications. But I understand that Europe has fallen behind in the manufacturing of semiconductors. In 2000, it had about 24% of the global production capacity, and that's gone down to 8% today. Because percentages don't always tell the full story, but what is the dynamic at play here? Has the absolute level of investment declined in Europe, despite it being a very strategic asset, or is it simply not progressing enough compared to other regions of the world?
Well, I think that there are a few points here that have played a role, and I don't think that you can blame either one of them on what has happened. I think that by nature, the Europeans have always relied on let's say, the more conventional and ruggedized semiconductors, without really looking at applications where the most advanced technologies are needed. So that's something that has helped to build this decline. Another thing is that other than in Asia and in the United States, I think the government role has been very, well, let's say, on the background, rather than the large fundings that you could see in Asia and the United States. In Europe, we always had to be aware of what's called state aid, because we had 27 different countries and you cannot give one advantage over the other one, and so that was always difficult. So the government support was maybe always poor, and yeah, and then you see that there's also within the companies there's lesser space to invest and to grow more. So it's a combination of reasons, I guess.
Yeah, I'd like to take you up on this question of state aid, because the European Union has been traditionally very strong, particularly on competition rules, and this has often prevented a lot of state aid type measures to be put in place. Now, with this announcement of the European Chips Act, do you see this as a possible turning point where Europe will suddenly recognize the value for public intervention to address what seems to be a global market failure?
Yes, I think that's well, in the bottom line of this Chips Act, and there are more initiatives within the European Commission. You see that there's more and more drive to collaborate across Europe and try to have all the European regions, companies, countries, whatever, act together on one issue. And if you do that, then you can also be a little bit more free in these state aid rules, etc. Because it is not anymore that you are preferring the money to go to a Norwegian country or a company rather than to a Spanish company, because you are working in an overall ecosystem where everybody has his role and everybody gets the part of the pie that is for him. So hopefully we get rid of a little bit of state aid with these initiatives.
Okay, and the other question that comes out of this is this issue of sovereignty. We need to guarantee European manufacturing sovereignty. We need to guarantee sovereignty over the applications that are able to come out from these investments. Would it be fair to say then that, given the situation with a lack of production of semiconductors in Europe, that today Europe is actually not sovereign?
Well, sovereign can mean two things. One is that you are the master or the ruler of the thing, and the other one has to do with independency. Well, the latter one, I think, yes, it is clear that Europe is at this moment quite dependent on what comes out of the United States and comes out of Asia. But on the other hand, Europe is just a powerhouse in innovation and developing new applications. So that new technology developments and also the development of new chips is one of Europe's strong points. But traditionally in Europe we have been more aiming at, let's say, the smaller applications where you do not make maybe not so much money as in the applications that Asia has been focusing on, like phones and memories and computers. And Europe more or less always focused on the let's say more the robust industrial electronics, which is just as in relation to the consumer market, a much smaller market. But there, the innovativity, I think, Europe is leading, and if we can combine that with a fair share of production, then we can be top of the bill again.
But at the same time, we talk about this shortage of chips, and particularly in industrial applications where you say that Europe is strong. So how does this global shortage of supply come about if on those segments Europe is relatively strong compared to on the consumer segments?
The shortage is on the smart processor chips, etc., and they have to come from Asia. I think that the things that we produce ourselves and also sensors and things like that we produce already in Europe, that there's not the real problem. It's the shortage in memories, processor chips, and these kind of things.
Now, it doesn't also seem to be the first time that Europe tries to pull together some kind of strategy to support the production of chips in Europe. Back in 2013, there was already a promise in the new European industrial strategy for electronics to mobilize 100 billion euros to expand Europe's advanced manufacturing capacity and to double Europe's chips production to 20% of global production. What were the lessons learned? Because clearly this has not been much of a success, otherwise we probably wouldn't be making the announcements that were made earlier this year. What were the lessons learned from this strategy failing, and do you really think that this European Chips Act can address them?
Well, to start with your last question, can the Chips Act address that? I think if we jointly with the European governments, with the national governments and the industries and institutes all work together and forget about our own egos and work on a European level, then yes, it can work. That leads me directly to the answer of the first question. What's the lessons learned? This was this famous. What was it? An aircraft of chips from Mrs. Cruz that was announced then. I think that the thing that never really worked out was that this collaboration. It was said in those days, and that still holds, I think, for more than 100%, that we need to combine the Leuven, Eindhoven, Dresden and Grenoble areas to one European Silicon Valley, or whatever you want to call it. That has never been flying. It is. We had a lot of money in the Horizon 2020 project, but that was not orchestrated towards doubling this production. Of course, in your proposal you had to mention that, but that didn't come across. And I think that's the main thing that will help that the Chips Act is being a success, is that Europe that takes the orchestrating role over what is happening in Europe, so that we can jointly work on this. And one step has already been taken by the Commission. That's they have created the Alliance of Processors and Semiconductor Technologies, where the key players are joining forces, and the Silicon Europe Alliance has offered to play the administrative and more supporting role for that alliance to make it a success. Because that's where the success factor lies: collaboration.
And that leads me to another point where Europe can face some difficulties. We talked previously about this question of state aid, but there's another area where Europe is struggling compared to other regions of the world, is that it's a combination of many countries. At the end of the day, Europe is only but a treaty, and between countries. And that means that when it comes to strategic, high-scale investments, it's quite complicated to actually find a location. And you mentioned that ideally there would be a combination between different regions of Europe where there are strong ecosystems, I gather, in this particular field of technology. But how can you really anticipate that Europe is capable of bringing together certain territories when actually each country is also competing individually on the world stage?
Yeah, that is a nasty question. But we should remember that this Chips Act, yes, it is said it is about chips, but it's much more. It's also about the production of smart systems for the healthcare, for automotive, for agro-food, for whatever. So it is much more than that. And then if we look at Europe, we have areas where they are good in building chips and designing chips, but other parts are good in building and designing applications. And now it is, I think, the challenge is to bring all these capabilities together towards one European approach to this business, and then go to that 20% region. But it needs a lot of orchestration to get that done. That will be a challenge. But that's where we can help with the Silicon Europe Alliance, is that because we know the chip designers and builders, we know them very well, but we also know the companies that invent the applications, and we can help to bring them together. And so that's just a tiny part of the puzzle, but I think an important part.
Your organization already has a cross-border element that could help to shape some sort of European governance of this sector. But there will always be a problem of distribution of strategic investment, and probably it's unlikely to imagine that this will be distributed equally across Europe's regions, because ultimately it's exactly the opposite that is the intention. It's to really identify specific areas where the money must be channeled, the investments must be channeled.
Yes, but for instance, if you look at, I just take two very opposites. If you look at software development, it takes relatively few investments. It's basically the salary of the people who work on it. On the other hand, if you look at the development of production equipment for semiconductor devices, that takes a lot of capital investments as well. So that is much more capital intensive, and also much slower in progress, and takes a longer time. So that are the things that we have to recognize, and to make sure that we are not a little bit sad when we do software and get lesser money than, because at the end of the day, it is the profit that we make is probably for everybody the same.
Yeah, I'd like to also open up this discussion to a few other points that maybe are not always considered in these industrial-led strategies, which is also, are we aware of the broader impacts of the increase in production of chips? Do we understand, for instance, the environmental or possible health risks that could stem from an increased production of these chips, and an increase in the kind of applications that these chips will feed into? Is there an estimate or an understanding of what is the environmental impact and how that can be addressed?
No, not that I'm aware of, but I think that the environmental impact is very well understood, at least in Europe. So we have a lot of regulations to make sure that the environmental impact, like proper treatment of wastewater and things like that. Energy consumption is also one of those. We are quite aware of that in Europe, so that I'm not too worried about that it would give a real problem. It could be a little bit more difficult in getting the necessary materials. Semiconductors do use a lot of precious materials, metals and whatever, and we have to get them from somewhere. And probably you can find them in Europe in the ground as well, but that can give some disturbance, and we have to deal with that in a very cautious way, of course.
Is that part of the European Chips Act? Are there areas that will cover that?
Not that I'm aware of, but
okay.
I think
And,
that is something that will be taken on more or less automatically. So that's
and the other question that I would have around this is, with the growth in production of semiconductors, which is a global thing, this is not a European issue. Are we pushing this transition towards a more digital, automated, machine learning and artificial intelligence based society? Is this the model that we can expect from an investment in the semiconductor industry, in the manufacturing of chips? And when we talk about this, I mean, for people in general, this can also be a topic of concern. It's not just about replacing people in factories, it's also about the broader ethical considerations around the power that these machines can have, and that we don't fully understand yet, or that we are not totally able to regulate or assess the impact of. Do you think this is a source of concern, or do you think the impact in terms of the applications is so great that we really need to just push and invest massively in semiconductor production?
Yeah, and I think on the one hand we need to embrace this transition towards more digital world, but on the other hand, we have to be aware of the things like, for instance, there will become a lot of we will have a lot of medical devices that say everything about our health, and that is transferred to a hospital, to a doctor who does something with it or not, or completely autonomous systems. We need to be very careful with that kind of information, because you don't want to have that spread around the world. And so there's a lot of information, financial information, for instance. We need to be very careful with that. So that is a point of that's a point of concern. That and we've seen in the past, of course, already some examples that complete databases are changed from owner. That's which we cannot have. So that's probably the only concern that I see. And we have a responsibility, on the other hand, that on the places where digital technologies takes over workspaces for people, that we take care of those people and make sure that they get other occupations or whatever. So we have to take up that responsibility. Simple.
Thanks, Ben. And as a final question, what is then, as Silicon Europe Alliance, your main expectation for the implementation of the European Chips Act?
It was already in 2018 that Mrs. Merkel said Europe should become more independent. I think now with what is happening on global scale with the Ukrainian war and whatever, that it is more and more evident that we have to become more independent, and this Chips Act for this part of Europe, this is a tiny part, will be can be successful if, what I already mentioned earlier, if we can succeed with an open eye on what's happening in Asia and in the United States, because we cannot say, well, we isolate ourselves. We have to be in this global ecosystem as well. So that's a challenge. But I think it can certainly work. And as a Silicon Europe Alliance, we are more than ready to support this to the extent that we can.
A global situation, but we also need to make sure that we're not suffering from global market failure and shortages of important assets.
No, but that is a challenge. You should be independent, but not. You cannot do everything. So basically, if everybody was friends with each other, then there was no problem.
Ben, thanks a lot for having shared your insights with us. I think we really learned a lot about some of the complexities behind these announcements, and we wish you well in the implementation of this European Chips Act. Thanks a lot for having taken part in the show.
My pleasure, and it was certainly a pleasure to share my ideas with you. Thank you.
That was Ben van der Zon. Stay tuned for the next episode.